The helicopter's rotors churned the desert air into a blinding sandstorm as it descended toward Forward Operating Base Sentinel, the most heavily fortified American position in the contested Khyber Valley. Through the swirling dust, the base emerged like a fortress carved from the rocky mountainside, its concrete barriers and watchtowers standing defiant against the harsh Afghan landscape. This wasn't just another military outpost. It was the nerve center for Operation Desert Thunder, America's final push to eliminate the insurgent network that had terrorized the region for over a decade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As the Chinook touched down on the landing pad, its massive frame dwarfed by the towering peaks that surrounded the valley, a single passenger stepped out into the chaos. Master Sergeant Daniel Crawford moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had spent 23 years perfecting the art of staying alive in hostile territory. At 45, his weathered face bore the map of countless deployments, each line etched by desert sun and mountain cold. His graying hair was cropped close beneath his boonie hat, and his pale blue eyes held the steady gaze of a man who had seen enough violence to appreciate the weight of each decision. What immediately drew attention wasn't his worn desert camouflage or the faded patches on his uniform. It was the rifle case slung across his back. Unlike the sleek black polymer cases carried by the other soldiers, Crawford's was ancient brown leather, cracked and scarred by decades of use, held together with military-grade tape and reinforced with metal corner guards. It looked more like a museum piece than combat equipment. The brass nameplate, green with age, reads simply, SGT, Robert Crawford, Vietnam, 1971. The base's operations center buzzed with controlled chaos as Crawford made his way through the maze of prefabricated buildings and hardened bunkers. Soldiers moved with purpose between ammunition depots, communication arrays, and the massive command center that coordinated strike missions across 3 countries. The sound of distant artillery rumbled through the mountains like perpetual thunder, a reminder that beyond these walls, a war was being fought with increasing desperation. Forward Operating Base Sentinel represented the pinnacle of modern military technology. Satellite dishes tracked enemy movements in real time, while banks of computers processed intelligence from drones circling high above the battlefield. The base's sniper teams were equipped with the latest precision rifles, custom-built weapons that cost more than most people's cars, featuring advanced optic systems, adjustable stocks, and suppressors designed to reduce both noise and muzzle flash. These weren't just guns. They were technological marvels that could place a bullet within inches of a target at distances exceeding a mile. In the shadow of this technological superiority, Crawford's battered rifle case seemed almost comical. Soldiers paused in their duties to stare as he passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed amusement. Here was a man carrying what appeared to be a family heirloom into a war zone where milliseconds and millimeters meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The base's commanding officer, Colonel Patricia Williams, had been expecting Crawford's arrival for weeks. His reputation preceded him, the Marine Corps' most decorated sniper, with confirmed kills spanning 4 different conflicts. But reputation was one thing, reality was another. As she watched him approach the command center through her office window, she couldn't help but wonder if the legendary Master Sergeant Crawford had finally succumbed to the same fate that claimed many career soldiers, an inability to adapt to changing times. The operations briefing room fell silent as Crawford entered, his presence immediately commanding attention despite his unremarkable appearance. Around the conference table sat the base's elite sniper teams, men and women in their 20s and 30s who represented the cutting edge of American military precision. Their equipment, laid out for inspection, gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Custom rifle systems with names like Accuracy International and Barrett dominated the table, each weapon a testament to engineering excellence and battlefield innovation. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Martinez, the base's senior marksmanship instructor, looked up from her equipment checklist as Crawford found an empty seat. At 32, she had trained hundreds of military snipers and had personally accounted for over 40 confirmed kills during her 3 tours in Afghanistan. Her weapon of choice was a modified M24 sniper weapon system, equipped with a Leupold Mark IV scope and a custom trigger system that could place shots within half an inch of each other at 800 yards. She had never missed a shot that mattered, and she had never seen equipment like what Crawford was carrying. "Gentlemen and ladies," Colonel Williams began, her voice cutting through the subdued conversations, "I want you to meet Master Sergeant Daniel Crawford. He's here as part of Operation Thunder's final phase." She gestured toward Crawford, who remained seated, his rifle case resting against his chair. "The Master Sergeant has been assigned to our long-range reconnaissance team for the duration of the mission." The room's atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Long-range reconnaissance was the most dangerous assignment on the base, requiring snipers to operate alone behind enemy lines for days or weeks at a time. It was a job that demanded not just exceptional marksmanship, but the kind of mental toughness that came only from years of combat experience. The soldiers around the table studied Crawford with new interest, evaluating this older man who would potentially be covering their backs in the field. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Bradley, the base's operations officer, leaned forward in his chair. At 38, he was young for his rank, but had earned his position through a combination of tactical brilliance and political savvy. His own sniper qualification scores were legendary among the base personnel, and he took pride in maintaining the highest standards for his teams. "Master Sergeant," he said, his tone respectful but probing, "we've heard impressive things about your service record. However, our current operations require equipment that can integrate with our advanced targeting systems. I trust you've brought something suitable?" Crawford's response was to reach for his rifle case, placing it on the table with a deliberation. That suggested ritual more than mere equipment handling. The leather creaked as he opened the brass latches, each sound echoing in the suddenly quiet room. When he lifted the lid, the collective intake of breath was audible. Inside the case, nestled in foam that had been cut and recut dozens of times, lay a rifle that seemed to belong in a different century. The weapon was a Winchester Model 70, its wooden stock dark with age and wear, its blued steel barrel showing the patina of countless cleanings. Unlike the synthetic materials and advanced alloys surrounding it, this rifle was carved from walnut and forged from steel, its craftsmanship evident in every hand-fitted component. The scope mounted on top was a simple Leupold variable power optic, decades old but maintained with meticulous care. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the elite snipers processed what they were seeing. In a world of carbon fiber and titanium, Crawford had brought wood and steel. In an age of digital reticles and ballistic computers, he carried manual adjustments and old-fashioned Kentucky windage. The rifle looked like something their grandfathers might have used, an anachronism in an environment where every advantage mattered. Staff Sergeant Martinez was the first to break the silence. "Sir," she said carefully, "that's a beautiful hunting rifle. My father had one similar. But for military applications, especially at the ranges we're operating." She gestured toward her own weapon, its modern lines and advanced features obvious even to an untrained eye. "The ballistic advantages of contemporary systems are significant." Crawford nodded, understanding her concern. His fingers traced the rifle's stock, finding the small imperfections and wear marks that told the story of its service. "This rifle was built in 1975, he said quietly. "My father carried it through 2 tours in Vietnam, then brought it home to Tennessee. He taught me to shoot with it when I was 12 years old, hunting white-tailed deer in the Cumberland Mountains." The room remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Crawford lifted the rifle from its case, his movements practiced and reverent. When I enlisted in 1982, I wanted to bring it with me, but the Corps had other ideas. I learned to shoot their rifles, followed their procedures, used their equipment. Good weapons, all of them. But when I got the chance to choose my own kit, for this mission, I chose this one. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley exchanged glances with Staff Sergeant Martinez, his expression skeptical. Master Sergeant, I respect tradition, but our current operations require capabilities that requires more modern solutions. Range finding, wind compensation, target tracking. These are complex calculations that contemporary optics handle automatically. I understand your concerns, Crawford replied, his voice steady and unhurried. But I've been making those calculations in my head for 23 years. This rifle, and I have an understanding. It's never let me down when it mattered, and I've never asked it to do something it couldn't handle. The briefing continued with discussions of mission parameters, enemy positions, and tactical requirements. But the attention in the room remained divided between the official proceedings and the anachronistic rifle lying on the table. As the meeting concluded and personnel began gathering their equipment, conversations inevitably turned to the new arrival and his unusual choice of weapon. "Did you see that thing?" whispered Corporal James Mitchell to his spotter as they headed toward the armory. "My grandfather probably used something like that in Korea. How's he supposed to compete with our systems?" His spotter, Private First Class Sarah Chun, shrugged as she adjusted her own equipment bag. "Maybe he's just nostalgic. Old soldiers sometimes get attached to their gear. But out here, nostalgia can get you killed." As the personnel dispersed to their various duties, Crawford remained in the briefing room, methodically cleaning his rifle despite its already pristine condition. The ritual was meditative, each component receiving attention that bordered on reverence. He had performed this same ceremony thousands of times, in bases and foxholes, in jungles and deserts, in the moments before missions that would test every skill he had learned. The Winchester Model 70 was indeed old-fashioned by modern standards, but it was also precise in ways that transcended technology. Its trigger broke cleanly at exactly 3 pounds, the same weight it had maintained for 30 years. Its barrel, hand-lapped by Winchester's master gunsmiths, could place 5 shots into a group smaller than a quarter at 200 yards. The scope, while lacking the advanced features of modern optics, was perfectly aligned and had never lost zero despite decades of hard use. But more than its mechanical precision, the rifle represented something that couldn't be quantified in specifications or measured in test results. It was the physical manifestation of a relationship between man and weapon that had been forged through countless hours of practice, refined through years of hunting, and tempered in the crucible of combat. When Crawford held this rifle, he didn't just aim at targets, he communicated with them, reading wind and distance, elevation and angle, through senses that had been honed to an almost supernatural degree. As the sun set over the mountains surrounding Forward Operating Base Sentinel, Crawford finished his cleaning ritual and carefully returned the rifle to its case. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of his skills and his equipment. The base's elite snipers had made their skepticism clear, their confidence in superior technology unshakable. But Crawford had faced skepticism before, in other conflicts, on other battlefields. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous assumptions were the ones that seemed most reasonable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The war in Afghanistan had been raging for over a decade, consuming resources and lives with no clear end in sight. Operation Desert Thunder represented what many hoped would be the final push-a coordinated effort to eliminate the insurgent network that had proven so elusive. The mission's success would depend on precision, timing, and the ability to make impossible shots under unimaginable pressure dot in the growing darkness. With the sounds of a base preparing for another day of combat, Crawford allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about his father, who had carried this same rifle through the jungles of Southeast Asia, and about the responsibility that came with inheriting such a weapon. He thought about the young snipers who would be depending on his skills in the coming days, and about the weight of expectations that came with a reputation built over 2 decades of service. Most of all, he thought about the shot that would either validate his choice or prove his critics right. Somewhere in the mountains beyond the base's perimeter, an enemy waited who had eluded America's most advanced technology for years. When that moment came, when everything depended on a single bullet, placed with perfect precision, Crawford would be ready. His rifle would be ready. The question was whether anyone else would be ready to believe in the power of experience over innovation, skill over technology, and the unbreakable bond between a warrior and his weapon. The mess hall at Forward Operating Base Sentinel buzzed with the usual pre-dawn energy as soldiers prepared for another day of operations. Steam rose from countless cups of coffee while the aroma of scrambled eggs and bacon filled the air, creating a brief illusion of normalcy in the midst of war. But this morning, the conversations carried an undercurrent of anticipation mixed with barely concealed amusement. Word had spread quickly through the base about the new arrival and his unconventional equipment. In a military environment where gossip traveled faster than official communications, Master Sergeant Crawford's Winchester Model 70 had already become the subject of intense speculation and not-so-subtle mockery. "I heard he brought his granddad's hunting rifle," chuckled Sergeant First Class Robert Kim to his breakfast companions. "Probably thinks he's going deer hunting in the Hindu Kush." Kim was part of the base's premier sniper team, a Korean-American from Los Angeles who had earned his reputation with a custom-built Remington 700 that could consistently hit targets at 1,200 yards. Across the table, Staff Sergeant Michael Torres shook his head in disbelief. 23 years in the Corps, and he shows up with a museum piece. "I've seen guys crack under pressure before, but this is a new one." Torres commanded respect as one of the few snipers who had successfully completed the Marine Corps' Advanced Sniper Course, a grueling program that had a failure rate exceeding 70%. The conversation paused as Crawford entered the mess hall, his presence immediately noticeable despite his attempt to maintain a low profile. He moved through the serving line with the efficiency of a career soldier, selecting his breakfast without engaging in the casual banter that typically characterized military dining. His worn fatigues and weathered boots marked him as a veteran, but his isolation from the younger soldiers was equally apparent. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley watched Crawford from his position at the officers' table, his expression thoughtful as he observed the older man's interactions with the base personnel. Bradley had spent considerable time reviewing Crawford's service record, and what he'd found had been impressive by any standard. 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Silver Star told the story of a warrior who had repeatedly distinguished himself under fire. But reputation and reality didn't always align, especially when age and changing technology entered the equation. "Colonel Williams wants to see you in her office," announced Captain Lisa Rodriguez as she approached Bradley's table. Rodriguez served as the base's intelligence officer, and her expression suggested the meeting wasn't entirely routine. "She received some interesting communications about our new team member." Bradley followed Rodriguez through the maze of prefabricated buildings to the command center, where Colonel Williams was studying a classified file with evident concern. The base commander looked up as they entered, her expression mixing professional curiosity with administrative frustration. "I've been receiving inquiries about Crawford," Williams began without preamble. "Apparently, his assignment to our operation has raised some eyebrows at higher levels. The Pentagon wants to know why we're employing what they're calling unconventional methods in such a critical mission." Bradley took the offered seat, his mind already working through the implications. Ma'am, his service record is exemplary. If there are concerns about his capabilities, perhaps we should address them through proper evaluation procedures. Williams slid a photograph across the desk. The image showed Crawford's rifle case, apparently taken during his arrival at the base. This picture has been circulating through intelligence channels. Some analysts are questioning whether we're taking the mission seriously enough. The suggestion is that Crawford might be suffering from what they're diplomatically calling combat fatigue. The phrase hung in the air like an accusation. Combat fatigue was military terminology for the psychological deterioration that affected some veterans after extended exposure to warfare. It was a career-ending diagnosis that stripped soldiers of their security clearances and effectively ended their usefulness to the military establishment. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am?" Bradley asked, his voice carefully controlled. Williams nodded. "I think we're making assumptions based on appearances rather than performance. Crawford hasn't failed any evaluation or demonstrated any inability to perform his duties. His choice of equipment might be unconventional, but it's not necessarily inadequate." Rodriguez interjected with the cold logic of an intelligence professional. "But it is problematic from a coordination standpoint. Our snipers work as integrated teams, sharing targeting data and ballistic information through advanced communication systems. Crawford's rifle can't interface with our networks. He can't receive real-time wind data or coordinate with our spotters using standard protocols." The technical arguments were compelling, but Bradley found himself uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Are we considering removing him from the mission?" "That's one option," Williams replied. "Another is to assign him to a support role where his experience can be valuable without compromising mission integrity. The decision ultimately depends on whether we believe his capabilities justify the accommodation." As if summoned by their conversation, Crawford appeared in the doorway, having been directed to report to the command center for his operational briefing. His presence immediately changed the dynamic in the room, transforming abstract discussions about his competence into a face-to-face evaluation. "Master Sergeant Crawford," Williams began, "we were discussing the integration of your equipment with our operational systems. There are some concerns about compatibility issues." Crawford's response was characteristically direct. "Ma'am, I understand the concerns. Modern military operations rely heavily on technological integration. My rifle doesn't have the electronic capabilities of contemporary systems, and I can't interface with your digital networks." "That's precisely the problem," Rodriguez said, her tone professional but firm. "In complex operations, coordination is critical. If you can't communicate with our systems, you can't function as part of the team." "Respectfully, ma'am, I've been functioning as part of teams for 23 years. The fundamentals of military cooperation haven't changed, even if the technology has." Crawford's voice remained steady, but there was an edge of frustration beneath his diplomatic words. Bradley leaned forward, curious about Crawford's perspective. "How do you propose to coordinate with our spotters and support personnel without digital communication?" "The same way snipers coordinated for the first 100 years of modern warfare," Crawford replied. "Through understanding, discipline, and clear communication. Technology can enhance those fundamentals, but it can't replace them." The answer seemed to satisfy no one. Williams exchanged glances with Rodriguez, both women clearly uncomfortable with the implications of Crawford's approach. The modern military had invested billions of dollars in communication systems designed to provide real-time battlefield awareness. Crawford's suggestion that such systems were unnecessary seemed to challenge the entire foundation of contemporary military doctrine. "Master Sergeant," Williams said finally, "I'm going to be direct with you. There are concerns at higher levels about your fitness for this mission. Some people believe that your choice of equipment reflects a disconnect from current operational realities. The accusation was delivered with clinical precision, but its impact was unmistakable. Crawford's expression hardened almost imperceptibly, the first crack in his professional composure since arriving at the base. "Colonel, I've served this country for 23 years. I've completed every mission assigned to me, under conditions that would challenge any soldier. If there are questions about my competence, I'm prepared to demonstrate my capabilities through any evaluation you consider appropriate." Rodriguez consulted her tablet, pulling up Crawford's psychological evaluation. Files. "Your last fitness report noted some concerning indicators. Extended combat exposure, social isolation, resistance to technological adaptation. The recommendation was for administrative reassignment to a training position. A recommendation that was overruled by my commanding officer," Crawford responded, his voice now carrying a harder edge. "Based on my continued operational effectiveness." Bradley found himself in the uncomfortable position of mediating between administrative concerns and professional judgment. "Master Sergeant, no one is questioning your past service. But this mission is critical to American interests in the region. We can't afford to take risks based on sentiment or tradition." "I'm not asking you to take risks," Crawford said, rising from his chair. "I'm asking you to judge me based on performance, not prejudice. Give me the same opportunity you'd give any other soldier to prove my worth." The challenge was clear, and it placed the officers in a difficult position. Denying Crawford the opportunity to demonstrate his capabilities would validate his accusations of prejudice, but allowing him to participate in critical operations with outdated equipment carried obvious risks. Williams made the decision that would define Crawford's role in the coming operation. "Very well, Master Sergeant. You'll participate in tomorrow's qualification exercise. All sniper personnel are required to demonstrate proficiency under combat conditions. If you can meet our standards, you'll be assigned to an operational team. If not, you'll be reassigned to a support role." Crawford nodded, understanding the stakes. "Thank you, ma'am. I won't disappoint you." As he left the command center, the officers remained silent, each processing the implications of what had just occurred. They had essentially agreed to test whether experience and skill could overcome technological disadvantage, a question that struck at the heart of modern military philosophy. The news of Crawford's qualification test spread through the base with the speed of all significant gossip. By evening, informal betting pools had emerged, with odds heavily favoring the younger snipers with their advanced equipment. The general consensus was that Crawford's challenge was admirable but doomed to failure. Staff Sergeant Martinez found herself in the unusual position of defending a man she barely knew. During the evening briefing with her sniper teams, she addressed the growing speculation about Crawford's capabilities. "I want everyone to understand something," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through demonstrated competence. "Master Sergeant Crawford has more combat experience than the rest of us combined. His methods might be different, but that doesn't make them wrong." Sergeant First Class Kim raised his hand. "Staff Sergeant, with respect, experience doesn't compensate for technological disadvantage. Our systems provide capabilities that individual skill simply can't match." "Maybe," Martinez replied. "But I've seen plenty of soldiers who relied too heavily on technology and forgot the fundamentals. When their equipment failed, they were helpless. Crawford might have something to teach us about those fundamentals." The debate continued through the evening, with opinions divided between those who saw Crawford as an anachronism and those who wondered if modern military training had become too dependent on technological solutions. But regardless of individual opinions, everyone agreed on one point. Tomorrow's qualification exercise would settle the question definitively. Crawford spent the evening in solitude, cleaning his rifle with the same meticulous care he had demonstrated since arriving at the base. The Winchester Model 70 gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the weapons maintenance room, its wooden stock reflecting decades of careful attention. Each component was inspected, cleaned, and reassembled with the precision of a ritual. As he worked, Crawford reflected on the day's events and the challenges that lay ahead. He understood the skepticism surrounding his equipment and methods. The military had evolved dramatically since his early career, embracing technologies that provided undeniable advantages in range, accuracy, and battlefield awareness. But technology was only as effective as the person using it, and Crawford had learned to trust his own senses and judgment more than any electronic system. The qualification exercise would test more than his marksmanship. It would determine whether the military establishment could accommodate different approaches to achieving common objectives. Crawford had faced similar challenges throughout his career, proving himself again and again to superiors who questioned his methods or capabilities. Tomorrow would be another such test, but the stakes had never been higher. As the base settled into its nightly routine, with sentries taking their positions and night operations beginning their missions, Crawford completed his rifle maintenance and prepared for sleep. In less than 12 hours, he would face the most critical evaluation of his career. The outcome would determine not just his role in the coming operation, but whether experience and traditional skills still had value in an increasingly technological world. The Winchester Model 70 rested in its case, ready for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Crawford had faith in his weapon, in his training, and in his ability to perform under pressure. Whether that faith would be justified remained to be seen, but he had never backed down from a challenge, and he wouldn't start now. Dawn came early. To the Khyber Valley, painting the jagged peaks in shades of gold and amber as the qualification exercise began. The base's primary rifle range had been transformed into a comprehensive testing ground that would evaluate every aspect of a sniper's capabilities under simulated combat conditions. Targets had been positioned at varying distances from 300 to 1,200 yards, some partially concealed behind barriers that mimicked battlefield obstacles. Wind flags fluttered along the range, indicating the crosswinds that would challenge even the most sophisticated ballistic computers. Master Sergeant Crawford arrived at the range 30 minutes before the scheduled start time, his Winchester Model 70 slung across his shoulder in its familiar leather case. The morning air carried the sharp bite of high altitude, and his breath formed small clouds as he surveyed the testing course. Unlike the other participants who had arrived with teams of spotters and support personnel, Crawford had come alone, carrying only his rifle and a small canvas bag containing his ammunition and basic equipment. Staff Sergeant Martinez was already positioned at the range control tower, her responsibilities including safety oversight and score tabulation. She watched Crawford through binoculars as he methodically examined each target position, his movements deliberate and analytical. There was something almost ritualistic about his preparation, not the nervous energy of someone facing a critical test, but the calm focus of a predator studying its hunting ground. "Early bird catches the worm," commented Sergeant First Class Kim as he arrived with his spotter, Corporal David Walsh. Kim's equipment case was a marvel of modern military engineering, containing not just his custom rifle but also a rangefinder, ballistic computer, and weather monitoring station. Too bad being early won't help him when the real shooting starts. Walsh, a 24-year-old from Michigan with exceptional eyesight and steady nerves, set up his spotting scope with practiced efficiency. "You really think he's going to embarrass himself out there?" "I think he's about to learn that good. Intentions don't compensate for technological disadvantage," Kim replied, adjusting his rifle's bipod. "This isn't a county fair shooting competition. These are military standards designed for combat effectiveness." The range began filling with personnel as word spread about the qualification exercise. What had started as a routine evaluation had transformed into something approaching a spectacle, with off-duty soldiers gathering to witness what many expected would be a humbling lesson in the importance of modern equipment. The betting pools had grown overnight, With odds running heavily against Crawford's chances of meeting the minimum qualification standards, Lieutenant Colonel Bradley arrived with Colonel Williams and several other senior officers, their presence adding an official weight to the proceedings. Bradley had spent considerable time reviewing the qualification requirements, ensuring that the test would be both fair and comprehensive. The standards were identical to those required of all base snipers, demonstrated accuracy at multiple ranges, target identification under adverse conditions, and successful engagement of moving targets. Gentlemen, Bradley announced over the range's public address system, today's qualification exercise will follow standard protocols. Each participant will engage targets at designated ranges using their preferred equipment. Scoring will be based on accuracy, timing, and target identification. Safety protocols are in effect, and all weapons will be cleared before movement between firing positions. Crawford had chosen a position on the far left of the firing line, physically separated from the other participants, but with clear sight lines to all target areas. He opened his rifle case with the same deliberate care he had demonstrated since arriving at the base, each component receiving attention that bordered on reverence. The Winchester Model 70 emerged from its foam padding like a relic from another era, its wooden stock gleaming despite decades of use. The contrast with his fellow competitors was stark. Staff Sergeant Torres had positioned his Barrett M82 on Flashier, a sophisticated shooting rest, its massive scope and bipod system, creating a platform that seemed more like a precision instrument than a weapon. Sergeant Kim's Remington 700 featured a stock that could be adjusted for length, cheek height, and cant, while its scope displayed digital readouts for range, wind speed, and ballistic calculations. First phase will commence with precision shots. At 600 yards, Bradley announced. Participants will engage 5 targets in sequence, with scoring based on proximity to center mass. Wind conditions are variable, with gusts up to 15 miles per hour from the southwest. The modern snipers immediately began consulting their ballistic computers, entering data for altitude, temperature, humidity, and wind speed. Digital displays showed calculated holdover values and wind compensation adjustments, transforming the complex mathematics of long-range shooting into simple scope adjustments. Crawford's approach was noticeably different. He lay prone behind his rifle, studying the targets through his scope while simultaneously watching the wind flags scattered across the range. His calculations were invisible, performed entirely in his head using formulas learned through decades of practice. He made no adjustments to his equipment, trusting instead in his ability to compensate for environmental factors through precise aim and timing. "Shooters ready," Bradley called. "You may commence firing when ready." The first shots cracked across the range in rapid succession as the younger snipers engaged their targets with mechanical precision. Digital displays behind each target showed impact points, with most shots clustering within the high-scoring inner rings. Torres scored consecutive hits within 2 inches of center mass, while Kim's grouping was slightly tighter at just over 1 inch. Crawford's rifle spoke last, its report noticeably different from the suppressed weapons around him. The Winchester's unsuppressed muzzle blast echoed off the surrounding mountains, a sound that seemed to belong to a different era of warfare. Through the spotting scopes, observers could see his bullet impact exactly in the center of the target, but the single shot generated less immediate excitement than the rapid-fire precision of his competitors. The second phase moved to 800 yards, where atmospheric conditions began to significantly affect bullet trajectory. The targets were smaller now, requiring not just accuracy, but the ability to read wind conditions that varied across the extended range. Most military snipers considered 800 yards the threshold where technology began to provide decisive advantages over traditional methods. Kim's ballistic computer calculated a holdover of 4.2 minutes of angle, with a wind correction of 0.8 minutes to account for the crosswind. His shot struck within 3 inches of the target center, an excellent result that drew appreciative comments from the observers. Torres followed with a similar performance, his Barrett's massive bullet cutting through the wind with devastating effectiveness. Crawford continued his methodical approach, taking significantly more time between shots as he analyzed conditions that his competitors measured with electronic instruments. His breathing pattern became more pronounced, each exhale timed to coincide with momentary lulls in the wind. When he fired, the bullet found its mark with the same precision as his previous shots, but the extended preparation time was noted by observers as a potential weakness in combat situations. "Interesting technique," Martinez commented to her assistant, Corporal Jennifer Adams. "He's reading the wind by watching grass movement and mirage patterns. It's like watching someone practice a lost art." Adams, a recent graduate of the Army's sniper school, was less impressed. "It's also slow. In a real combat situation, that kind of hesitation could be fatal. Modern systems provide instant solutions to problems he's trying to solve manually." The third phase introduced the element that would prove most challenging for Crawford's vintage equipment: moving targets. 3 human-shaped silhouettes began traversing the range at 400 yards, their movement patterns programmed to simulate running combatants. The targets would be visible for only seconds at a time, requiring rapid target acquisition and precise leading calculations. The younger snipers adapted quickly to the challenge, their advanced scopes allowing them to track moving targets with electronic assistance. Kim's scope featured a ballistic reticle that automatically calculated leading distances, while Torres employed a rangefinder that continuously updated target distances as the silhouettes moved. Both men scored solid hits, demonstrating the technological advantages of their equipment. Crawford's approach to moving targets revealed both his experience and his limitations. Without electronic assistance, he relied entirely on instinct and training to calculate leading distances and timing. His first shot missed by inches, the bullet passing just behind a target that had moved slightly faster than anticipated. The miss drew murmurs from the watching crowd, the first sign of fallibility in the veteran sniper. But Crawford's second shot was different. Instead of the methodical precision he had demonstrated on stationary targets, he fired with fluid smoothness, his rifle tracking the target's movement in a natural arc. The bullet struck the silhouette in the center of the chest area, a shot that would have been instantly fatal in combat. "Lucky shot," someone whispered from the observation area. But Martinez was studying Crawford's technique with professional interest. She had seen that type of shooting before, in older instructors who had learned their craft before the advent of modern technology. It was instinctive marksmanship, the result of thousands of hours of practice with moving game animals. Fourth phase tested perhaps the most critical skill for military snipers: target identification under adverse conditions. Smoke generators created artificial haze across the range, while strobe lights simulated the disorienting effects of explosions and muzzle flashes. Targets appeared and disappeared randomly, requiring shooters to quickly identify legitimate threats. Among decoy silhouettes, the modern optical system struggled with the challenging conditions, their sophisticated electronics occasionally confused by the artificial interference. Kim's thermal imaging scope provided some advantages, but the strobe effects disrupted his target tracking software. Torres adapted by switching to manual targeting, effectively reducing his advanced equipment to Crawford's basic level. In these conditions, Crawford's experience became apparent. Years of hunting in low-light conditions had taught him to identify targets through partial concealment and atmospheric interference. His shots came at irregular intervals, but each one found its mark with the consistency that had defined his career. While his competitors struggled with equipment that worked perfectly in ideal conditions, but faltered under stress, Crawford's fundamental skills remained unaffected. "Phase 4 complete," Bradley announced. "Scores are being tabulated for final results." The range fell silent as Martinez and her assistants calculated the cumulative scores from all 4 phases. The results would determine not just Crawford's qualification status but also validate or refute the technological assumptions that defined modern military doctrine. When the scores were announced, the silence deepened into something approaching shock. Torres had scored 94 out of 100. An excellent result that reflected both his skill and his equipment's capabilities. Kim had achieved 92, slightly lower due to difficulties with the moving target phase. Both scores were well above the minimum qualification threshold and represented the kind of performance expected from elite military snipers. Crawford's score was 96. The number seemed to hang in the air like a challenge to everything the observers had believed about the relationship between technology and performance. The veteran with the ancient rifle had not just qualified, he had outperformed snipers, half his age using equipment that cost 10 times as much. "That's impossible," Kim said, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and professional respect. "The ballistic advantages alone should have given us a decisive edge." Martinez approached Crawford as he cleaned his rifle, her expression mixing curiosity with newfound respect. "Master Sergeant, I have to ask, how do you compensate for the technological disadvantages of your equipment?" Crawford looked up from his cleaning, his weathered face showing the first hint of a smile since arriving at the base. "Staff Sergeant, I appreciate the question, but I think you're making an incorrect assumption. My rifle isn't technologically disadvantaged. It's technologically independent. There's a difference." The distinction was subtle but profound. While his competitors relied on external systems to solve ballistic problems, Crawford had internalized those solutions through years of practice and experience. His rifle was simpler, but it was also more reliable, more predictable, and more intimately familiar to him than any computer system could ever be. As the qualification exercise concluded and personnel began departing the range, Crawford remained at his position, methodically cleaning his rifle with the same attention to detail he had shown since arriving at the base. The Winchester Model 70 had proven itself worthy of its reputation, but more importantly, it had proven that experience and skill could still compete with the most advanced technology. The implications of Crawford's performance would ripple through the base in the hours and days to come, forcing soldiers and officers to reconsider assumptions about the relationship between technology and effectiveness. But for now, the immediate question had been answered. Master Sergeant Daniel Crawford had earned his place on the operational team, and his ancient rifle had earned the respect of every person who had witnessed its performance. The secure briefing room at Forward Operating Base Sentinel hummed with activity as intelligence officers prepared for what would become the most critical mission briefing in Operation Desert Thunder's history. Maps covered every available wall space. Satellite imagery displayed enemy positions with startling clarity, and communication equipment linked the base to command centers across 3 time zones. The morning's qualification exercise had resolved questions about Crawford's capabilities, but it had also raised new questions about the mission itself. Colonel Williams stood at the head of the conference table, her expression grave as she reviewed the classified intelligence reports that had arrived during the night. The operations timeline had been accelerated, driven by intercepted communications, indicating that their primary target was preparing to relocate to a position beyond American reach. What had been planned as a methodical campaign would now become a single, decisive strike requiring unprecedented precision and coordination. "Ladies and gentlemen," Williams began, her voice carrying the weight of command decisions that would affect thousands of lives. "The situation has changed dramatically. Intelligence assets have confirmed that Hassan al-Rashid, the architect of the insurgent network we've been hunting for 8 years, will be attending a coordination meeting in the Torkham Pass in 72 hours. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Al-Rashid was more than just another terrorist leader. He was the strategic mind behind a network that had killed over 3,000 American soldiers and countless civilians. His elimination would effectively decapitate the insurgency, but his capture or death had eluded coalition forces despite the deployment of the military's most advanced resources. Captain Rodriguez activated the room's main display, showing satellite imagery of a remote mountain compound 30 miles from the base. The target location is here, at coordinates 34.21 north, 71.07 east. The compound sits on a plateau at 7,800 feet elevation, surrounded by terrain that makes conventional assault impossible. Intelligence indicates al-Rashid will be present for approximately 6 hours before departing for Pakistan. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley studied the topographical data with growing concern. The compound's position was strategically brilliant high, enough to provide commanding views of all approach routes, remote enough to avoid detection, and positioned near the Pakistani border for rapid escape if necessary. Any ground assault would be detected miles away, while airstrikes risked civilian casualties in the surrounding villages. The only viable approach is through precision elimination, Williams continued. A single shot, taken from extreme range, during the brief window when al-Rashid is exposed. Miss, and he disappears forever. The window for this opportunity may not come again. Staff Sergeant Martinez leaned forward, studying the targeting data with professional interest. "Ma'am, what's the range to target from our optimal firing position?" Rodriguez consulted her tablet, highlighting a ridge system that offered the best combination of concealment and sight lines. Approximately 1,847 yards. The shot would need to account for significant elevation changes, variable wind conditions, and the target's limited exposure time. The distance was staggering, even by military standards. At nearly 1,900 yards, atmospheric conditions would affect bullet trajectory in ways that challenged even the most sophisticated ballistic computers. Temperature variations, humidity changes, and wind patterns would all influence the bullet's path during its 3-second flight time. Torres whistled softly. That's beyond the effective range of most military rifle systems. Even with perfect conditions, we're talking about a prayer shot. Not exactly, Martinez replied, her mind already working through the ballistic calculations. The Barrett M82 has confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. With proper preparation and favorable conditions, it's technically possible. Crawford had remained silent throughout the briefing, but now he spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had faced similar challenges before. The technical capabilities of our equipment are less important than our understanding of the operational environment. Has anyone been to this location before? Rodriguez shook her head. The area has been under insurgent control for 6 years. We have satellite imagery and electronic intelligence, but no ground truth from our personnel. The absence of first-hand knowledge was a significant disadvantage. Satellite imagery could provide accurate topographical data, but it couldn't convey the subtle environmental factors that affected long-range shooting, local wind patterns, temperature inversions, and atmospheric conditions that varied with terrain. Features. Master Sergeant, Williams said, given your performance this morning, I'm assigning you to the primary sniper team for this mission. You'll be working with Staff Sergeant Martinez as your spotter. The announcement surprised everyone, including Martinez herself. Standard procedure would have assigned the mission to Torres or Kim, both of whom had more experience with the advanced equipment that seemed necessary for such an extreme shot. Crawford's inclusion represented a departure from conventional military doctrine that would have far-reaching implications. Colonel, with respect, Torres interjected, this mission requires maximum technological advantage. The Barrett system provides capabilities that vintage equipment simply cannot match. Williams considered the objection carefully. Sergeant Torres, your concerns are noted. However, This morning's exercise demonstrated that equipment advantages don't always translate to superior performance. Master Sergeant Crawford will take the primary position, with you and Sergeant Kim providing backup positions. The decision was final, but it created tension within the team that would need to be resolved before the mission commenced. Crawford understood the dynamics at play: younger soldiers questioning the judgment of their superiors, technology advocates frustrated by what they saw as an unnecessary risk. As the briefing concluded and personnel began preparing for the mission, Martinez approached Crawford with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Master Sergeant, I need to understand your background better if I'm going to be your spotter. That shot this morning, it wasn't just good training. There's something else." Crawford had expected this conversation. His performance during the qualification exercise had demonstrated skills that couldn't be explained by standard military training alone. The time had come to reveal the experiences that had shaped his abilities. "Staff Sergeant, what I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that most people on this base don't have clearance for. But you need to understand what you're getting into." They walked to a secure area outside the command center, where Crawford began to share the story that explained his unique capabilities. His voice remained steady, but there was a weight to his words that suggested memories, both precious and painful. "In 1987, I was selected for a joint operation with the CIA's Special Activities Division. The mission was to train Afghan Mujahideen fighters in advanced marksmanship techniques. I spent 14 months in the Hindu Kush, living with tribal fighters who had been hunting in these mountains for generations." Martinez listened intently, understanding that she was hearing about operations that didn't exist in any official record. Special Activities Division missions were compartmentalized at the highest levels, their participants sworn to secrecy that lasted decades beyond their service. "The tribal elders taught me techniques that had been passed down through centuries of warfare in mountain terrain. They showed me how to read wind patterns that changed with elevation, how to compensate for atmospheric pressure variations, and how to judge distances in thin air where normal range-finding methods failed." Crawford's voice took on a different quality as he continued, the memories clearly still vivid after 35 years. But the most important lesson was about patience and timing. In the mountains, you often have only one shot. Miss, and your target disappears into terrain that provides infinite hiding places. "The elders taught me to wait for the perfect moment, to trust my instincts over my equipment." The story explained much about Crawford's approach to marksmanship. His methodical preparation, his ability to read environmental conditions without electronic assistance, his confidence in taking shots that others considered impossible, all were products of training that combined American military discipline with indigenous knowledge refined over centuries. "There's more," Crawford continued. "In 1994, I was assigned to a classified mission in Bosnia. A Serbian commander named Dragoljub Petrovic was coordinating ethnic cleansing operations from a fortified position in the mountains near Sarajevo. Intelligence indicated he was planning to eliminate a refugee camp with over 2,000 civilians." Martinez understood the gravity of what she was hearing. Operations in Bosnia were still classified, their details known only to the participants and their immediate commanders. Crawford was sharing information that could affect his security clearance and potentially his freedom. The shot was from 1,963 yards, across a valley with unpredictable wind patterns. I had one opportunity during a 15-minute window when Petrovic would be exposed on a balcony. Miss, and 2,000 innocent people would die within hours. Crawford paused, his eyes focused on the distant mountains as if seeing that long ago. "Target, I made the shot. Petrovic died instantly, and the ethnic cleansing operation collapsed without his leadership. The refugee camp was evacuated safely the next day." The story provided context for Crawford's confidence in taking extreme range shots under pressure. He had succeeded before, in similar terrain, against targets whose elimination had strategic importance. But it also revealed the personal cost of such missions. "The psychological evaluations in my file," Crawford continued, "they're not wrong. About the effects of extended combat exposure. Taking a life at that distance, knowing that thousands of innocent people depend on your precision, it changes you. The responsibility becomes part of who you are." Martinez nodded, understanding why Crawford had been reluctant to discuss his background. The burden of such missions was immense, and the isolation that came with classified operations compounded the psychological effects. Crawford's choice to work with vintage equipment wasn't just about familiarity. It was about maintaining connection to the fundamentals that had saved lives in the past. "There's something else you need to know," Crawford said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My father didn't just carry this rifle in Vietnam. He used it to make a shot that ended a siege that would have killed his entire company. When he gave it to me, he said it wasn't just a weapon, it was a responsibility to use precision for protection, never for mere killing." The philosophical dimension of Crawford's relationship with his rifle added depth to his character that went beyond military training. The weapon represented a legacy of service and sacrifice that connected him to previous generations of warriors who had faced similar challenges. As evening approached and the base prepared for the mission that would commence before dawn, Crawford and Martinez continued their conversation, building the professional relationship that would be critical to their success. Martinez shared her own background growing up in Texas, learning to shoot from her grandfather, joining the military to serve her country and prove herself in a male-dominated field. "I understand why you chose me as your spotter," she said, as they concluded their discussion. "It's not just about my technical qualifications. It's about understanding that some things can't be taught in training manuals." Crawford nodded, recognizing in Martinez the same dedication to excellence that had driven his own career. "Staff Sergeant, tomorrow we're going to attempt something that most people would consider impossible. But impossible is just another word for difficult when you have the right tools, the right training, and the right mindset." As the base settled into its pre-mission routine, with equipment being checked and rechecked, communications tested, and personnel briefed on their roles, Crawford performed his familiar ritual of rifle maintenance. But this time, the cleaning process carried additional significance. Within hours, the Winchester Model 70 would be asked to perform at the absolute limit of its capabilities, in conditions that would test every lesson Crawford had learned during his 23-year career. The mission that awaited them would demand more than just technical precision. It would require the kind of judgment that came only from experience, the kind of patience that was forged through adversity, and the kind of courage that accepted responsibility for consequences that extended far beyond the immediate target. Hassan al-Rashid had evaded American forces for 8 years, surviving drone strikes, special operations raids, and intelligence operations that had eliminated dozens of his lieutenants. Tomorrow, his fate would be determined by a single bullet fired from a rifle that had been hunting in mountains for nearly half a century. The convergence of old and new, tradition and technology, experience and innovation would play out across 1,847 yards of thin mountain air. With the future of an entire region hanging in the balance, the pre-dawn darkness of the Khyber Valley held a bitter cold that cut through even the most advanced military gear as the sniper team made their final approach to the target ridge. Crawford and Martinez had been moving for 6 hours, climbing through terrain that challenged both their physical endurance and tactical skills. Behind them, Torres and Kim maintained overwatch positions, their advanced equipment providing electronic surveillance of the surrounding area, while Crawford relied on instincts honed through decades of mountain warfare. The target ridge rose like a stone blade against the star-filled sky, its elevation providing the commanding view necessary for the shot that would determine the fate of the entire operation. At 9,200 feet above sea level, the air was thin enough to affect both human performance and ballistic calculations, while the rocky terrain offered concealment opportunities that had been invisible in satellite imagery. Martinez established the spotting position with methodical precision, her high-powered scope oriented toward the distant compound where Hassan al-Rashid would appear within the next 2 hours. The range measurements had been confirmed through multiple methods, 1,847 yards of mountain air that would test every aspect of Crawford's abilities. At that distance, the bullet would require nearly 3 seconds to reach its target, during which time atmospheric conditions could affect its trajectory in ways that defied precise calculation. Environmental conditions are marginal, Martinez reported through her throat microphone, her voice barely audible even to Crawford lying beside her. Temperature is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity at 47%, barometric pressure 24.8 inches. Wind is variable, ranging from 8 to 15 miles per hour from the northwest. Crawford processed the information while making his own observations of the terrain between their position and the target. The shot would cross 3 distinct wind zones, each with different velocities and directions that would affect the bullet's path. At extreme ranges, such variations could cause deviations measured in feet rather than inches, transforming precision. Shooting into an exercise in environmental prediction. "I'm reading the wind differently," Crawford said quietly, his eyes focused on distant grass movements and thermal mirages that were invisible to electronic instruments. "The valley creates a funnel effect that accelerates wind speed in the middle zone. Your instruments are giving average readings, but the bullet will encounter peak velocities." Martinez adjusted her calculations, understanding that Crawford's environmental reading skills had been developed through years of experience in similar terrain. Modern instruments provided accurate data, but they couldn't interpret the subtle signs that indicated changing conditions. A lifetime of hunting in mountains had taught Crawford to read the landscape itself. The waiting began at 0347 hours, with intelligence reports confirming that al-Rashid's convoy had departed from a safe house in Peshawar and was approaching the target compound. The terrorist leader maintained operational security through unpredictable scheduling, but intercepted communications indicated he would arrive within the next 90 minutes for a meeting that would last no more than 6 hours. As the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, Crawford entered the mental state that had sustained him through similar missions over the past 2 decades. His breathing slowed to a rhythm that would minimize body movement, while his heartbeat settled into the steady cadence that preceded his most difficult shots. The Winchester Model 70 felt alive in his hands, its familiar weight and balance providing psychological comfort that no amount of advanced technology could replicate. "Movement in the compound," Martinez reported, her voice tense with anticipation. 3 vehicles approaching from the south. Positive identification on the lead vehicles. Occupants is not possible at this range. Crawford made minute adjustments to his position, ensuring that his body alignment would remain stable for the extended period that might be required. The shot window could last anywhere from seconds to hours, depending on al-Rashid's security protocols and the compound's defensive arrangements. Mental discipline was as critical as physical preparation for missions that demanded sustained readiness. At 0523 hours, the compound's activity increased noticeably. Additional personnel appeared on the building's rooftops, their movement patterns suggesting the arrival of someone important. Security teams established perimeter positions, while communications personnel deployed electronic equipment that would provide early warning of approaching threats. "Target identification positive," Martinez announced, her voice carrying the controlled excitement of a professional recognizing a critical moment. "Hassan al-Rashid, positive identification based on facial recognition and body language analysis. Target is on the compound's main balcony, approximately 15 feet above ground level." Crawford acquired the target through his scope, the image wavering slightly through the thermals rising from the valley floor. Al-Rashid appeared as a figure barely larger than a pencil point, his features indistinct at the extreme range, but his position clearly defined against the building's white walls. The terrorist leader was conducting what appeared to be a briefing session. His attention focused on documents spread across a table rather than potential threats from the surrounding mountains. Range confirmed at 1,847 yards, Martinez continued. Target is stationary, but security personnel are moving in predictable patterns. Estimate 12 to 15 minutes before the target moves to interior positions. The window was opening, but Crawford waited. Years of experience had taught him to distinguish between opportunity and optimal opportunity. Al-Rashid's current position offered a clear shot, but his body angle was partially obscured by the balcony's railing. A miss by inches would alert the compound's security forces and eliminate any chance of a second attempt. Environmental conditions are changing, Crawford observed, watching distant grass movements that indicated shifting wind patterns. The morning thermal inversion is beginning to break up. Wind speed is increasing in the middle zone, but direction is becoming more consistent. Martinez consulted her instruments, confirming Crawford's assessment. Atmospheric pressure is rising. Temperature increasing by approximately 2 degrees per hour. The ballistic computer indicates optimal conditions in approximately 8 minutes. But Crawford's attention had shifted to something that no computer could calculate: Al-Rashid's behavior patterns. The terrorist leader was moving around the balcony with the restless energy of someone conducting important business. His stops at various positions were brief, but one location, near the balcony's eastern edge, seemed to hold his attention longer than others. Target psychology suggests he'll return to the eastern position, Crawford said, his voice barely audible. He's reviewing documents that require better lighting. The sun angle will draw him back to that spot within the next few minutes. Martinez trusted Crawford's judgment, but she also understood the risks of delaying the shot. Intelligence reports indicated that Al-Rashid's security protocols called for movement to interior positions after 30 minutes of outdoor exposure. The window was closing, and atmospheric conditions might not remain optimal much longer. At 0534 hours, Al-Rashid moved to the eastern edge of the balcony, his body fully exposed as he studied documents in the improving light. The angle was perfect, the background clear, and the target stationary. Crawford's crosshairs settled on the center of Al-Rashid's chest, accounting for the wind drift and bullet drop that would affect the projectile during its 3-second flight. Shot conditions optimal, Martinez reported. Clear background, no wind variation, target stationary. Recommend immediate engagement. Crawford's finger found the trigger, applying the precise pressure that would send a 150-grain bullet across nearly 2,000 yards of mountain air. But instead of firing, he hesitated, his instincts warning him of something that his conscious mind hadn't yet identified. "Negative," he said quietly. "Something's wrong." Martinez felt her heart rate increase as she processed Crawford's decision to abort the shot. Through her scope, she could see Al-Rashid in perfect position, completely unaware of the rifle aimed at him from the distant ridge. The opportunity was flawless by every measurable standard, yet Crawford's experience was warning him away from the engagement. "Master Sergeant, conditions are optimal," Martinez urged, her voice carrying the urgency of a professional who understood the fleeting nature of such opportunities. "Target is exposed, environmental factors are favorable, and our window is closing rapidly." Crawford's response was to shift his point of aim slightly, studying the compound through his scope with the intensity of someone searching for an invisible threat. His years of experience had taught him to trust instincts that operated below the level of conscious thought, sensory inputs that registered patterns without necessarily understanding their significance. "There," he said suddenly, his voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who had identified a hidden danger. Second-story window, southwestern corner. Counter-sniper position, approximately 40 yards from the target. Martinez swung her scope to the indicated position, her training allowing her to rapidly acquire the potential threat. What she saw confirmed Crawford's instincts. A barely visible rifle barrel, protruding from a window that commanded excellent views of the surrounding ridgelines. The position was occupied by a sniper whose job was to eliminate exactly the kind of threat that Crawford represented. Positive identification on counter-sniper position, Martinez confirmed, her voice reflecting newfound respect for Crawford's situational awareness. The weapon appears to be a Soviet-era Dragunov rifle, with an effective range of approximately 800 yards. Our position is beyond his effective engagement range, but target movement could bring us into his kill zone. The tactical situation had become exponentially more complex. Al-Rashid remained in perfect position for Crawford's shot, but the presence of a counter-sniper meant that any movement after the engagement would draw hostile fire. The mission parameters didn't include provisions for extraction under fire, and the terrain offered limited escape routes. Mission parameters remain unchanged, Crawford said, his voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had faced similar situations before. Target elimination is the priority. The counter-sniper position is a manageable threat. At 0541 hours, Al-Rashid moved to his final position. The terrorist leader stood at the balcony's edge, his attention focused on the valley below as he surveyed the landscape that had provided sanctuary for his operations. His body was perfectly silhouetted against the white building walls, offering the kind of target that snipers dreamed of encountering. Crawford's breathing settled into the rhythm that preceded his most important shots. The Winchester Model 70 seemed to merge with his body, its familiar weight and balance providing the stability necessary for extreme precision. His finger found the trigger, applying pressure so gradually that the rifle's discharge would come as a surprise even to him. Environmental conditions are stable, Martinez reported, her voice tight with anticipation. Wind speed consistent at 12 miles per hour, direction northwest. Temperature 34 degrees, barometric pressure steady. Target is stationary. Clear background, optimal engagement conditions. The moment stretched into eternity as Crawford made the final calculations. That would determine the mission's success or failure. At 1,847 yards, the bullet would drop approximately 47 feet during its flight, requiring Crawford to aim at a point far above Al-Rashid's head. Wind drift would push the projectile approximately 8 inches to the right, demanding compensation that relied entirely on experience and instinct. "Shot," Crawford whispered, his voice barely audible as his finger completed the trigger pull. The Winchester Model 70 recoiled against Crawford's shoulder with the familiar authority of a weapon that had been perfectly maintained for decades. The muzzle flash was brief but visible, a signature that would reveal their position to anyone equipped to detect it. The bullet departed the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, beginning its journey across the valley with the precision that would determine the fate of countless lives. For 2.8 seconds, the bullet flew through the thin mountain air, its trajectory affected by every environmental factor that Crawford had calculated and compensated for. Gravity pulled it earthward while wind pushed it sideways. Atmospheric density slowed its progress, while temperature variations affected its stability. The projectile carried not just kinetic energy, but the hopes of everyone who had worked to make this moment possible. Martinez tracked the bullet's flight through her scope, watching for the impact that would signal either success or failure. The distance was too great for her to see the projectile itself, but she could observe its effect on the target and the compound's immediate response to the engagement. At 0541 hours and 37 seconds, Hassan al-Rashid collapsed onto the balcony's stone floor, Crawford's bullet having found its mark with the precision that defined a career built on impossible shots. The terrorist leader's death was instantaneous, his body falling in a way that left no doubt about the engagement's success. The compound erupted into chaos as security personnel scrambled to respond to a threat they couldn't locate or understand. The counter-sniper position became active, its occupants searching desperately for targets that remained invisible from his limited perspective. But Crawford and Martinez were already beginning their extraction, moving through terrain that would provide concealment from the increasing security response. "Target eliminated," Martinez reported into her radio, her voice carrying the controlled excitement of someone who had witnessed military history. "Confirmed kill. Hassan al-Rashid is down. Beginning extraction procedures." The shot that ended an 8-year manhunt and crippled a terrorist network that had killed thousands had been fired from a rifle that predated most of the technology used in its success. Crawford's Winchester Model 70 had proven once again that precision, properly applied, could accomplish objectives that seemed impossible to achieve through conventional means. The extraction from the target ridge became a masterclass in tactical movement as Crawford and Martinez navigated the treacherous mountain terrain, while enemy forces converged on their general area. The successful elimination of Hassan al-Rashid had triggered a massive security response, with insurgent forces establishing roadblocks and search patterns designed to trap the unknown sniper team. But Crawford's experience in mountain warfare, combined with Martinez's exceptional navigation skills, allowed them to move through terrain that electronic surveillance couldn't penetrate. 12 hours after the shot that had ended al-Rashid's reign of terror, Crawford and Martinez reached the extraction point where a helicopter waited to return them to Forward Operating Base Sentinel. The flight back to base was conducted in radio silence, but the electromagnetic spectrum buzzed with intercepted communications that painted a picture of an insurgent network in complete disarray. Without al-Rashid's strategic leadership, the various factions that had united under his command were already beginning to fracture. Colonel Williams waited on the landing pad as the helicopter settled onto the tarmac, her expression mixing relief with professional satisfaction. The mission's success had exceeded even the most optimistic projections, eliminating not just a high-value target, but effectively decapitating an entire terrorist organization. Intelligence reports were already indicating that al-Rashid's lieutenants were fleeing the region, abandoning weapons caches and safe houses in their haste to escape before coalition forces could capitalize on their leader's death. "Master Sergeant Crawford, Staff Sergeant Martinez," Williams said as the crew disembarked, her voice carrying the formal tone of official recognition. "On behalf of the United States military and the people you've protected through your actions, I want to express our gratitude for a mission executed with exceptional skill and courage." Crawford accepted the praise with the quiet dignity that had characterized his entire career, but his attention was focused on the immediate aftermath of the operation. Intelligence personnel were already analyzing the secondary effects of al-Rashid's elimination, tracking the movements of his associates and preparing follow-up operations that would capitalize on the network's disruption. The base's operations center had been transformed into a nerve center for coordinating the exploitation of intelligence opportunities created by the successful mission. Communications intercepts revealed that al-Rashid's death had been confirmed by multiple sources, with various terrorist factions already beginning to blame each other for security failures that had led to their leader's exposure. The psychological impact of the elimination was proving as significant as its tactical effects. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley approached Crawford with an expression that mixed professional respect with personal curiosity. "Master Sergeant, I have to ask, how did you know about the counter-sniper position? Our intelligence assessments missed that threat entirely." Crawford's response reflected the experiential knowledge that had guided his career. "Sir, in mountain warfare, security positions follow predictable patterns based on terrain features and sight lines. The compound's defensive arrangements suggested they were prepared for exactly the kind of threat we represented. The counter-sniper position was a logical placement that any competent security team would establish. The explanation highlighted the difference between technological intelligence, gathering, and situational awareness developed through years of combat experience. While satellite imagery and electronic surveillance could provide accurate information about physical structures and personnel movements, they couldn't interpret the tactical implications of defensive arrangements or predict enemy behavior based on established patterns. Staff Sergeant Martinez found herself in the unusual position of being recognized as part of a historic military operation while simultaneously processing the professional lessons learned from working with Crawford. Her role as spotter had provided intimate insight into methodologies that differed significantly from contemporary military doctrine, yet had proven devastatingly effective under the most demanding conditions. The environmental reading skills he demonstrated, Martinez explained to Torres and Kim during their operational debriefing, weren't just impressive, they were superior to our electronic instruments. He was calculating wind variations and atmospheric effects that our computers couldn't detect. Torres, who had initially been skeptical of Crawford's capabilities, now found himself reassessing fundamental assumptions about the relationship between technology and effectiveness. "I've been thinking about what happened up there," he said, his voice carrying the thoughtful tone of someone processing unexpected lessons. "We've become so dependent on our systems that we've forgotten some of the fundamentals those systems were designed to enhance." Kim nodded in agreement, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity about Crawford's methods. The way he read the terrain, the patience he showed in timing the shot, the environmental awareness, those aren't skills you learn from training manuals. They come from years of experience that most of us haven't had the opportunity to develop. The recognition of Crawford's capabilities spread through the base's personnel with the speed of military gossip, but this time the conversations carried respect rather than ridicule. The Winchester Model 70 that had been dismissed as a museum piece was now being discussed as a precision instrument that had accomplished what the military's most advanced systems had failed to achieve for 8 years. Captain Rodriguez, the base's intelligence officer, approached Crawford with a classified briefing folder that contained preliminary assessments of the mission's strategic impact. "Master Sergeant, the intelligence community is calling this the most significant counterterrorism success in the region since the beginning of operations. Al-Rashid's network is collapsing faster than our most optimistic projections predicted." The briefing revealed the scope of the insurgent network's disintegration. Safe houses were being abandoned, weapons caches were being relocated or destroyed, and communication networks were going silent as various factions attempted to avoid the coalition response that would inevitably follow. The strategic paralysis created by al-Rashid's elimination was proving more effective than years of conventional military operations. "The Pentagon is requesting a comprehensive after-action report," Rodriguez continued, with particular emphasis on the methodologies that enabled mission success. "There's significant interest in understanding how traditional marksmanship techniques achieved results that advanced systems couldn't duplicate." Crawford understood the implications of such attention. His success would be studied, analyzed, and potentially incorporated into training programs designed to enhance the capabilities of future military snipers. But he also recognized that the most important aspects of his performance couldn't be easily replicated or systematized. "Captain, the techniques I employed aren't revolutionary," Crawford said, his voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone discussing routine procedures. "They're fundamental skills that have been refined through years of practical application. The difference isn't in the methods themselves, but in the depth of understanding that comes from extensive experience." The distinction was crucial for understanding Crawford's success. While modern military training could teach the theoretical principles of long-range marksmanship, it couldn't replicate the intuitive knowledge that came from thousands of hours of practice under varying conditions. Crawford's abilities represented the accumulation of experience that transcended any single technique or methodology. As evening approached, the base's personnel began to process the psychological impact of witnessing capabilities that challenged their fundamental assumptions about military effectiveness. The younger snipers, in particular, found themselves reconsidering the relationship between technology and skill in ways that would influence their approach to future operations. Sergeant First Class Kim approached Crawford during the evening maintenance period, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine interest in learning from the veteran's experience. "Master Sergeant, would you be willing to share some of the techniques you used during the mission? I'm beginning to understand that there are aspects of marksmanship that our training programs don't address." Crawford's response reflected the teaching philosophy that had guided his career. "Sergeant Kim, the most important lesson isn't about any specific technique. It's about understanding that technology should enhance fundamental skills, not replace them. When your equipment fails or conditions exceed its capabilities, you need to be able to rely on basic competencies that remain effective regardless of circumstances." The conversation continued as other personnel joined the discussion, creating an impromptu training session that blended Crawford's experiential knowledge with the younger soldiers' technical expertise. The exchange of ideas created a synthesis that enhanced everyone's understanding of advanced marksmanship principles. Torres contributed his own insights based on years of experience with the Barrett M82 system, while Martinez shared observations about environmental factors that affected long-range shooting. The collaborative discussion demonstrated how different approaches to the same fundamental challenges could complement each other rather than compete. "The key insight," Martinez observed, "is that Master Sergeant Crawford's methods aren't obsolete. They're foundational. Modern systems work best when they're operated by someone who understands the underlying principles they're designed to enhance." The recognition of Crawford's capabilities extended beyond the immediate military context to implications for training programs and operational doctrines. The success of traditional methodologies under extreme conditions suggested that contemporary military education might benefit from incorporating techniques that predated advanced technology. Colonel Williams convened a senior staff meeting to discuss the broader implications of the mission's success, with particular attention to lessons that could be applied to future operations. The discussion revealed institutional awareness that technological superiority wasn't sufficient to guarantee operational success, and that experiential knowledge remained a critical factor in achieving military objectives. "The question we need to address," Williams said, opening the discussion, "is how to systematically incorporate the kind of skills that Master Sergeant Crawford demonstrated into our training programs. We can't replicate his 23 years of experience, but we can identify the principles that made his approach effective." Bradley responded with the practical perspective of someone responsible for training implementation. "The challenge is that many of Crawford's capabilities are based on intuitive knowledge that's difficult to teach through conventional methods. Environmental reading, tactical patience, situational awareness, these are skills that develop through extensive practice under varied conditions." The discussion highlighted the tension between efficiency and effectiveness in military training. While standardized programs could quickly prepare large numbers of personnel for basic competencies, they couldn't replicate the depth of understanding that came from years of specialized experience. Rodriguez contributed the intelligence perspective on the mission's strategic impact, noting that al-Rashid's elimination had created opportunities for follow-up operations that would further degrade the insurgent network's capabilities. "The mission's success has opened a window for exploitation that wouldn't have existed if we had failed to eliminate the target." As the meeting concluded, Crawford found himself in the position of being recognized not just as a skilled individual, but as a representative of approaches to military service that retained value despite technological advances. His success had validated the importance of experience, patience, and fundamental skills in achieving objectives that seemed impossible through conventional means. The Winchester Model 70 that had been dismissed as an anachronism was now being studied as a precision instrument that had accomplished what billion-dollar weapon systems had failed to achieve. But Crawford understood that the rifle's significance lay not in its technical specifications, but in its representation of the relationship between a warrior and his tools. Its representation of the relationship between a warrior and his tools, bond forged through years of practice and refined through the crucible of combat. The immediate aftermath of the mission's success created momentum for changes in training programs and operational doctrines that would influence military practices for years to come. Crawford's demonstration that traditional skills could achieve results that advanced technology couldn't replicate had implications that extended far beyond a single successful shot. As the base prepared for the next phase of operations, with follow-up missions designed to exploit the intelligence opportunities created by al-Rashid's elimination, Crawford returned to his familiar routine of weapon maintenance and preparation. The Winchester Model 70 required the same careful attention it had always demanded. Regardless of the historic significance of its most recent employment, the rifle that had been mocked for its age and dismissed for its limitations had proven that effectiveness transcended technological specifications. In the hands of someone who understood its capabilities and limitations, the vintage weapon had achieved what the military's most advanced systems had failed to accomplish for nearly a decade. The mission's success had ended more than just al-Rashid's life. It had ended a chapter in the war against terrorism that had consumed American resources and lives for years. The strategic impact of a single precisely placed bullet had demonstrated the continuing relevance of individual skill and experience in an era dominated by technological solutions. 3 months after the shot that ended Hassan al-Rashid's reign of terror, the ripple effects of Crawford's success continued to reshape military doctrine and training programs across the United States Armed Forces. The Pentagon's comprehensive analysis of the mission had concluded that traditional marksmanship fundamentals, when properly applied, could achieve strategic objectives that advanced technology alone couldn't accomplish. This recognition sparked the most significant revision of sniper training protocols in over 2 decades. At the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School in Quantico, Virginia, Master Sergeant Crawford stood before a classroom of advanced students who represented the future of American military precision shooting. The room was filled with Marines who had already mastered the technical aspects of their profession, but Crawford's presence signaled a new emphasis on experiential knowledge that transcended equipment capabilities. "Ladies and gentlemen," Crawford began, his weathered Winchester Model 70 resting on the podium before him. "For the past 3 months, I've been asked to explain how a 30-year-old rifle achieved what our most advanced systems couldn't accomplish for 8 years. The answer isn't in the rifle's specifications or my particular techniques. It's in understanding the relationship between the shooter, the weapon, and the environment." The students listened with the intense focus of professionals who understood. They were receiving knowledge that couldn't be found in any manual. Crawford's reputation had preceded him, but more importantly, his results had validated approaches that many had dismissed as obsolete. "The fundamental principle," Crawford continued, "is that technology should enhance human capabilities, not replace them. When you understand the basics of ballistics, environmental factors, and target behavior, advanced systems become tools that multiply your effectiveness. But if you depend entirely on those systems, you become helpless when they fail or encounter conditions they weren't designed to handle." The training program that evolved from Crawford's mission had become known as the Enhanced Marksmanship Integration Course, combining traditional techniques with modern technology in ways that maximized both human potential and equipment capabilities. Students learned to read wind patterns through grass movement and mirage observation, to calculate holdover values mentally, and to assess target behavior through psychological analysis rather than electronic surveillance. Staff Sergeant Martinez, now serving as Crawford's co-instructor, provided the bridge between traditional and contemporary approaches. Her experience as Crawford's spotter had given her unique insights into methodologies that complemented rather than competed with modern systems. The key insight from our mission, Martinez explained to the class, was that Master Sergeant Crawford's environmental reading skills were superior to our electronic instruments because he understood the physical principles those instruments were designed to measure. He wasn't guessing about wind patterns, he was observing atmospheric phenomena that our sensors couldn't detect. The course curriculum included modules on historical marksmanship techniques, environmental science, and tactical psychology that had been absent from military training for decades. Students learned to hunt with traditional equipment, to shoot without electronic assistance, and to develop the patient observation skills that had defined Crawford's approach to impossible challenges. Captain Torres, now serving as the program's tactical coordinator, had undergone his own transformation since witnessing Crawford's success. His initial skepticism had evolved into advocacy for integrated training approaches that combined the best aspects of traditional and modern methodologies. We discovered that our dependence on technology had created blind spots in our capabilities. Torres admitted during a program evaluation meeting. When conditions exceeded our equipment's parameters, we had no fallback options. Crawford's approach provides those alternatives while enhancing our technological advantages. The program's success was measured not just in improved marksmanship scores, but in the development of adaptive thinking that prepared snipers for conditions that couldn't be anticipated or simulated. Students learned to problem solve under pressure, to trust their instincts when electronic systems failed, and to maintain effectiveness regardless of equipment limitations. Lieutenant Colonel Bradley, now responsible for implementing the enhanced training program across multiple military installations, observed the transformation with professional satisfaction. We're producing snipers who are more versatile, more adaptable, and more effective than previous generations. They understand both the capabilities and limitations of their equipment, which makes them better operators overall. The impact extended beyond individual training to influence equipment procurement and operational planning. Military contractors began developing systems that complemented rather than replaced human capabilities, while mission planners incorporated traditional skills into operational assessments that had previously relied entirely on technological solutions. The Winchester Model 70, that had been dismissed as obsolete, was now displayed in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes. Its brass nameplate supplemented with an inscription that read, Master Sergeant Daniel Crawford, Afghanistan, 2023, the shot that ended the war. But Crawford himself was more interested in the weapon's continuing service as a teaching tool than in its historical significance. This rifle represents something more important than any individual achievement, Crawford said during a ceremony honoring the mission's success. It represents the continuity of American military excellence that connects every generation of warriors who have served our country. The techniques I used were taught to me by soldiers who learned them from their predecessors, creating an unbroken chain of knowledge that spans centuries. The philosophical dimension of Crawford's success had implications that extended beyond military applications. Corporate training programs began incorporating principles of experiential learning that emphasized fundamental skills over technological dependence. Educational institutions studied the integration of traditional and modern methodologies as a model for preparing students to function effectively in rapidly changing environments. Dr. Patricia Chun, a military historian at the Naval War College, analyzed Crawford's mission as part of a broader study of technological adaptation in warfare. What Master Sergeant Crawford demonstrated was that human factors remain the decisive element in military success, regardless of technological capabilities. His achievement represents the kind of adaptive thinking that distinguishes exceptional performers from merely competent ones. The academic analysis of Crawford's success contributed to scholarly discussions about the relationship between experience and innovation in professional development. Military journals published articles examining the integration of traditional and modern training methodologies, while defense contractors studied the implications for equipment design and operational planning. But perhaps the most significant impact occurred at the individual level, as Crawford's example inspired a generation of military professionals to seek deeper understanding of their craft. Young snipers began studying ballistics theory, environmental science, and tactical psychology with the same intensity they had previously devoted to equipment mastery. Sergeant First Class Kim, now serving as an instructor at the Enhanced Marksmanship Integration course, reflected on his own transformation from skeptic to advocate. Crawford showed us that mastery isn't about having the best equipment, it's about understanding your profession so thoroughly that you can achieve excellence regardless of circumstances. That's a lesson that applies to every aspect of military service. The program's graduates were already demonstrating superior performance in operational environments, with mission success rates that exceeded previous standards. More importantly, they were developing the adaptive thinking that prepared them for challenges that couldn't be anticipated through conventional training methods. Colonel Williams, now serving as the program's senior advocate at the Pentagon, had become a vocal supporter of integrated training approaches that combine traditional and modern methodologies. Crawford's success proved that we had been thinking about this wrong, she said during a congressional hearing on military training effectiveness. We thought of traditional techniques as obsolete rather than foundational. His achievement showed us that the most advanced technology works best when it's operated by someone who understands the underlying principles. The congressional testimony contributed to funding decisions that supported expanded implementation of enhanced training programs across all military branches. The investment in integrated methodologies was seen as essential for maintaining American military superiority in an increasingly complex global environment. 5 years after the mission that had changed military training doctrine, Crawford retired from active duty to establish the Crawford Institute for Applied Marksmanship, a civilian organization dedicated to preserving and teaching traditional shooting skills. The Institute's programs attracted students from military, law enforcement, and civilian communities who sought to develop capabilities that transcended technological dependence. The Institute's flagship program, known as the Heritage Skills Course, taught participants to shoot with iron sights, to read environmental conditions without electronic assistance, and to develop the mental discipline that had characterized Crawford's approach to impossible challenges. Students learned that true marksmanship was as much about understanding oneself as understanding one's equipment. The goal isn't to reject modern technology, Crawford explained to each new class, but to master the fundamentals that make technology effective. When you understand the basic principles of ballistics, environmental factors, and target behavior, you can adapt to any situation regardless of equipment limitations. The Institute's success created a network of skilled marksmen who carried traditional techniques into their professional roles, creating multiplicative effects that spread throughout the military and law enforcement communities. Police departments began incorporating heritage skills into their training programs, while military units sought instruction that would enhance their operational effectiveness. Martinez, now serving as the Institute's chief instructor, had become a leading advocate for integrated training, approaches that maximize both human potential and technological capabilities. Her experience as Crawford's spotter had provided unique insights into methodologies that could be taught and replicated. What we learned from that mission, Martinez said during a training conference, is that the most sophisticated equipment is only as good as the person operating it. Crawford's success came from understanding his profession so thoroughly that he could achieve excellence with any tool. That's the standard we're trying to teach. The Institute's research programs contributed to ongoing developments in military training and equipment design. By studying the integration of traditional and modern techniques, researchers identified principles that could be applied to other professional domains where human factors remain decisive. The Winchester Model 70 that had ended a war through a single precisely placed bullet continued to serve as a teaching tool, its significance lying not in its historical achievement, but in its representation of the relationship between skilled practitioners and their instruments. Students learned that mastery wasn't about having the best equipment, but about understanding their profession so thoroughly that they could achieve excellence regardless of circumstances. Crawford's legacy extended beyond any individual technique or methodology to encompass a philosophy of professional development that emphasized fundamental understanding over technological dependence. His example had inspired a generation of military professionals to seek deeper knowledge of their craft, creating capabilities that would serve American interests for decades to come. As the sun set over the Virginia mountains where the Crawford Institute conducted its training programs, students practiced the same skills that had enabled an impossible shot 5 years earlier. They learned to read wind patterns through grass movement, to calculate holdover values mentally, and to develop the patient observation skills that had defined Crawford's approach to precision shooting. The rifle that had been mocked for its age and dismissed for its limitations had proven that effectiveness transcended technological specifications. In the hands of someone who understood its capabilities and limitations, the vintage weapon had achieved strategic objectives that the military's most advanced systems had failed to accomplish. But more importantly, Crawford's success had demonstrated that human factors remained the decisive element in professional achievement, regardless of technological capabilities. His story had become a reminder that true mastery came not from having the best equipment, but from understanding one's profession so thoroughly that excellence could be achieved under any circumstances. The shot that ended a war had become the foundation for a new understanding of the relationship between tradition and innovation, experience and technology, individual skill and institutional capability. Crawford's legacy would continue to influence military training and professional development for generations to come, proving that sometimes the most important victories are won not through superior firepower but through superior understanding of fundamental principles that remain constant regardless of changing circumstances. The Winchester Model 70 rested in its case, ready for another day of teaching students who would carry its lessons into their own professional challenges. Rifle that had been dismissed as obsolete had become the foundation for a new approach to excellence that would serve American military interests for decades to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.